Hi, welcome back to another TerranScapes video. Today we're going to be taking a look at these boards, which were recently finished, an entire modular board set designed to match some existing terrain that a customer had already, sent me a piece to match. We're going to talk about that in more detail. This is my second take on this video, as I'd actually done a beautiful video that had all these great pictures. I'd done all this color correction, I'd spent hours and hours on it, and then my computer had some major hard software problems, and I was on the phone with Dell for 8 hours, and finally we had to reimage the computer, and I lost the files. So this is part 2. But the benefit of that is that oftentimes I do videos a little better the second time around, so I'm going to try and be concise. I'm not going to set up the entire boards on the floor as I had done for the first video, because that takes quite a bit of time. But I do have a photo of the boards all laid out, so I'm going to be interjecting through the video some of the still photographs that I have of these boards so that you can see them with good clarity, good color, and see some of the shots that I just lost when the computer went down. Luckily I saved the actual photos themselves though, so you'll be able to at least see those. So, saying all of that, let's take a look at these boards again. So for these close-ups, because of the color of the board and the way the camera picks up that color, I'm going to try to shoot the boards a little bit intermixed with some other objects in the background, as it helps the camera render the colors a little more accurately. We'll see. I had to do a lot of fixing in the previous video. But taking a look at this, you can see one of the rock boards, and the rock board is a great place to start, because one of the things that the customer requested for these boards is not only to match the existing piece of terrain shown here, you can put that over there to see, but also to have the boards be very arid, very dry feeling, and in the rivers just a trickle of water, that sort of idea. So what I did is I went a little differently for the foliage for these boards than I do traditionally, and I dropped almost all of the clump foliage on the boards. You can see a few spatterings of it here, and I'll show you another close-up of this board in a second. But what I did instead is I focused mainly on grasses. So I used a lot of different silfloor clump grasses. I used little woodland scenics grasses scattered throughout. I used a little bit of sisal material to make some short grasses, trying to emulate a little bit of what was on the piece that the customer sent to me. Although obviously this is much taller, but hey, it's a different species. At this size though, I thought about getting a little larger with my pieces. One of the things that happens, at least to my eye, is that when you start getting quite a bit larger in the materials, you start to lose some of the realism. And in this instance, you can see a little of the twist that shows up when you use large clumps of sisal, and it kind of emulates sisal rope a little bit more than I feel comfortable doing myself, so I kept with very small pieces scattered throughout to just give that little low-level scrub, barely kind of eking out of the floor of the desert. That way when miniatures are around it, they'll still tower over it, but really when they're in this board, you're really looking at the rocks to provide cover and line of sight, not the foliage itself. One of the other things that I added to these boards is I added some cactus pieces. I've had some Pegasus Hobbies cactus kicking around, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to try to put a few pieces in, scatter them around, and let's take a little closer look at that, and hopefully you can see those details a little bit better. You can see, some of those cactus pieces laid out on the board, just to kind of give it one extra type of vegetation and something to give that feel of dryness a little bit. I think overall it conveys a nice sense of the aridity, I don't know if that's a word, of the desert feel. One of the things I should mention is it was pretty tricky to color match this. The original color that I used, which is actually the color painted here on the side of the boards, see if I can show you how it doesn't quite match. See it? I don't know if this camera's going to pick that up. I don't have a photo of this. But it came out just a little bit too bright. And I even had a small color swatch, which I had placed on this piece to make sure it matched before I had the paint mixed. It looked fine, but once I had painted a large surface area, it immediately became obvious that when I set this down on it, it didn't match right. So I had to go back over all the boards and do a wash to darken the color, to give it a little more of a reddish hint to tie in with this darker color that's in this piece. And that took a little bit of time and a little bit of effort, but I like the challenge of trying to color match. And it's something that, of course, I want to be able to offer. It makes TerranScapes services a little bit more unique, but there probably is going to be, in the future, there's going to probably be a little surcharge for color matching just because it can be kind of a trick. One of the other things that I was concerned about for these boards is that because the surface texture is quite a bit different, if you notice on this piece made by a different terrain artist or studio, you know, there's not a lot of texture overlaid on the surface of this. So you get this, and it's only got one dry brush of white on it, as opposed to, you know, I typically build up a variety of colors, and I often avoid white as it can be a little bit stark as a highlight color. But my main concern was that because the textures are different, you're going to get a different color feel. Even though the same colors might be used, this is going to have a very kind of different distribution on the eye and the way it reflects light back. But overall, once I dropped this on there, I felt like it was a pretty good match, actually, and it came out much better than I expected. Overall, I was very happy with that. So here you can see again another board here. This is a built-in Mesa, and with some of the highlighting to affect some of the feel on that other piece that I showed you that the customer sent, the previous terrain. So using white as a final highlight to pick out the edges. And you can see some of the grasses scattered about. Again, you know, because I have structures on these boards, you know, like the Mesa, and it's built up, it's going to protect these things when your boards are stored, so the boards won't be crushing the vegetation. So that afforded me the ability to, you know, stick in a couple cacti around it, some more of that sisal grass. See if I can give you a little close-up of what that looks like. Give you a sense of that. And just another example of what, you know, some of the boards look like in person, up close. Customer also requested a set of pair of crater boards, and the crater boards I oftentimes will paint into the center, you know, blackened, scorched areas to reflect recent blasts, darkening of the earth. I opted not to do that on these, mainly because of the way the boards are in such a dry, dusty environment. You know, I picture winds are going to be carrying dust around on a board like on a scene like this quite regularly and covering up any kinds of markings that would be in there. So I opted to leave them as a natural color scheme. The other thing I noticed is that the boards, you know, one had a bit more rocks around it, and one didn't have. This one has quite a bit of rubble debris thrown out from it. And I realized that at first I was a little concerned about that, but I thought, you know, that kind of reflects some of the different underlying geology that might be present in different areas. So you've got areas where maybe large boulders, bedrock are very close to the surface and they're shattered by the blast and carried out, and other areas where there's deeper sand and there's not much, you know, large rock material underneath, and then you're just going to have plain sand blown out. So it's kind of a nice little variation, actually, and adds something a little extra to the board sets. So here you see one of the river boards. There are several river boards included in the set and an end cap, and the customer really wanted just a small amount of water coming through the actual channel of the riverbed rather than flooding it entirely from side to side. So what I did here is I built up these edges just a little bit, and I've got a way to do this a little quicker next time. It took me a little extra time to build this up, so that I have a very shallow channel running through the actual dry riverbed, and that way it would hold the water, and I was able to fill that and then cover it with a little movement so that you could get a sense. Let's see if I can get a little light reflection in that. Oh, there you go. So you get a little sense of movement in there, nothing extreme, and I left the water a very clear color, tinted it just slightly, just to give it a little bit of a muddy look, but nothing extreme, reflecting that, you know, water this shallow is going to be relatively clear to see. This slow moving doesn't pick up a lot of silt, so you actually get quite a bit of clarity in the water, and that affords the ability to be able to see the bottom, as I've shown here in this piece. And here you get a sense of some of the buttes that were included in the set. The arch shown here, and 2 sets of the buttes, so 10 pieces plus the arch total. And each of these pieces, you know, features again some vegetation carried around the talus slope at the bottom of the butte. Again, you know, matching the other pieces that you've seen, giving that dry look and avoiding really the use of any bright clump foliage. Just a few pieces scattered here and there, and a lot of grasses to give it a little bit more of a scrubby look, something a little different than what I've done before. One of the things, before I leave these, one of the things I should mention is that sometimes, you know, with the Martian pieces, I tend to paint the buttes to match the the soil color, as this is eroding rock that's feeding the soil color of the desert. But in this instance, I wanted to give it just a slightly different look, something where it hasn't quite weathered the same as the actual surface of the soil below. So I gave this a little bit of a wash to darken it, give it just an essence of like a charcoal gray in its interior, but very subtle. It would set it off a little bit and show that it's maybe of a different composition than the soil below. And I think that came out really, really well. It's just enough of a difference to give it something a little distinctive, but not enough to really, make it feel out of place with the surrounding topography of the boards. So, thanks for taking the time to come and, visit me through video and see the work that I just completed there. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe give you some inspirations if you're doing some of your own desert theming on your own. And it gives me a chance just to, showcase the ability to color match pieces. So if you've got some existing terrain, it's early in the morning today. Some existing terrain, and you like some of the pieces that you see on the website, TerranScapes.com, but you feel like, oh, it doesn't quite match, it's not going to fit in, you can always send a piece to me once we, come to an agreement on what you're interested in purchasing, and I can use that piece to color match often very, very closely to the existing terrain that you have, so that it all works seamlessly and it will feel unified on the tabletop, which for me is always pretty important when I'm setting up a table. If you want to see pictures of any of these board sets, you can see them in the custom gallery at TerranScapes.com. They're up already. And if you want to see some of the other products that I've produced, different kinds of custom work I've done, information on when the store is opening. I'm working really hard this month to reopen the store for October instead of November. So there's going to be a lot of site changes between now and then, prices, policies. I'm going to be re-accepting custom work. So take a look at the newsletter at TerranScapes.com. I'll put a link down below so it's easy to find. There's information there on that. And of course, if you want to contact me, you can always put comments down below again. I love to see those, or you can email me at mike@terranscapes.com.